start with our pledge and moment of silence.
There you go. Works perfect.
You must have heard the word donut. He was just talking about it.
It's like got held up at Dunkin' Donuts. Got held up at Dunkin' in the drive-thru.
What's that? Oh, yeah.
Mrs. Faust, when you're ready, go ahead with the roll call.
Mr. Burkhart.
Here.
Dr. Faulkner.
Here.
Mr. Garman.
Here.
Dr. Green. Mr. Gregg.
Here.
Mr. Hoffman.
Here.
Mr. Reichert. Mr. Umbriak.
Here.
Mr. Reichert Jr.
Here. Item number 3, public comment, max of 3 minutes for agenda items only. Nobody is coming to the microphone to speak. Subject 4, the academic affairs and mental health agenda items. The cell phone usage topic for tonight we are going to not discuss tonight. It was something that Dr. Green wanted to discuss tonight, and he's not with us. He asked to table that for tonight and discuss it when he can be here to discuss it. So that'll take us to 4.2, dress at high school valediction and graduation. Dr. Need.
Thank you. And Mr. Ryan, if you could just take us ahead a couple of slides, then we'll skip over cell phone usage. I apologize for the frog in my throat, a little under the weather this evening. So at the last month, there was a little bit of public comment about valediction and graduation, and so I just wanted to explain some of that information to the board this evening. I'd like to first just start by thanking Dr. Gump and Mr. Varholic for their leadership on this. A couple other people I would just like to mention. We have a group of advisors at the high school, Mrs. Radler, Mrs. Blansfield, Mr. Frank, and Mr. Angstadt, who work with our student leadership at the high school. And also kudos to Mr. Johns and Miss Rickert and Miss Parker in the guidance office. Both our student council group and our guidance office work very hard to pull off these two just fantastic events. Last year we did move graduation outside, and it was a beautiful evening and a beautiful, I'll use the word classy ceremony. So it was a wonderful time to celebrate our graduates. But I just wanted to explain these two events to folks. So we do have two events at the end of the year for our graduating class. There's a valediction event and a graduation event. Also, just as we're shouting out people, Dr. Gump and Mr. Varholic do share with parents of seniors information about all of the special events that happen in the senior year, starting in August of senior year, and then continue to provide parents with updates throughout the year. They also meet with student leaders throughout the year as various senior events are happening. So like seniors are planning their class trip, and those things are planned and led by students. So students have a lot of voice as we plan our valediction and our graduation ceremonies. So I just want to acknowledge, and I think that's very appropriate, that at the high school level we are including student voices. So just in terms of a difference between valediction and graduation, valediction is a night where students are rewarded for their individual accomplishments. So at this night, students are receiving individual awards for a variety of accomplishments that may be athletic or club in nature or volunteer work in nature. And it's also a night where students are earning individual scholarships. And then graduation night is a night where we're celebrating students as a class, like this year's class of 2025, so they get to come together as a class. And it's also a night in which we celebrate the academic achievement of earning a high school diploma. So if you move to the next slide, specifically looking at valediction just a little more closely, again, this is an evening to celebrate those personal accomplishments. So in terms of student dress at a valediction event, We do have students wear their Danville purple gowns with their orange sashes to this event, but then we also allow them to wear anything that obviously needs to be like appropriate for public, but that designates an individual accomplishment that they'd like to proudly share, because this is a night for them to kind of get to show off their personal high school accomplishments and get those individual awards. So you will see students that night wearing district and state medals that they've earned at athletic events or at club events. You'll see them wearing cords and sashes that represent various clubs that they're a part of. And they can even wear things that designate some accomplishment outside of school. So if there's something specifically connected to like an Eagle Scout, something that an honor that they've earned, something in dance, if they're going to the armed forces, something to designate a college or university. Again, as long as it's appropriate, this truly is the night that we're celebrating each student individually and their unique accomplishments. Also would just like to note that the things that are being celebrated at valediction and those things that students are wearing, there are often many other opportunities for students to be celebrated for those personal accomplishments. So we like to bring people here and honor them at school board meetings. Students are in our newsletters, but also many of these things have their own special ceremonies. So Eagle Scouts have their own Eagle Scout ceremonies. The FFA has a banquet. They also have regional and state awards ceremonies. Forensics has state and national awards ceremonies. Athletics have banquets for every athletic event. And there are even like banquets for kids that make district and state teams, things like that. So the things that we're celebrating there, we're extremely proud of our students and happy for them, but have often been celebrated and rewarded multiple times throughout senior year for someone. Before we move to graduation, just again highlighting that this is a night to say congratulations on your personal accomplishments that could be in the classroom or they could be extracurricular related. Dr. Gumper, Mr. Varhalik, is there anything else you'd want to just add about the valediction event?
Yeah, the way we structured it last year was we tried to give every student their time in the spotlight by calling them up alphabetically after a lot of the what we call the outside scholarships are done. We have them come up on stage alphabetically. So basically every senior that's receiving an award or recognition is doing so, and they actually have their time in the spotlight. So it's an evening that takes a lot of time, but it's worth it. It's good. The feedback we received last year from students and parents was it was very nice that again, I always say Johnny and Susie, but Johnny and Susie have time up on stage to be recognized for their awards and distinctions.
Last year, I had the privilege of serving as a superintendent and a mom of a graduating senior, and definitely felt like it was a beautiful ceremony, and students kind of got their special time where you got to learn about them as an individual, and they got to share sort of some bio information. So it was a night to not necessarily think about them like when I think about last year's class as the class of 24, but individually, like Jill Need got to be celebrated, as did many students from the class of 24. And that would be a night where, again, I'd like to just specifically shout out our guidance department who just works tirelessly to pull that off. And those dates, again, are given to families in August so that if they wanted, to fill the auditorium with people for that event, they would certainly be welcome to do so. If we go to our next screen then, just to talk a little bit about graduation night. So when we think about what graduation is, this event last year was moved outside for the first time in several years. It was beautiful. This is a night where we're celebrating what essentially earns you that high school diploma. So we're celebrating the class of 2025. All of the students coming to that night have earned the honor and the academic achievement of earning a Danville High School diploma. And so although we continue to be very proud of that athletic award or that FFA award or the Key Club award or the scholarship they've gotten, this particular night is about the fact that they had the academic achievement of earning that high school diploma. And they've earned that diploma through their academic performance by passing and successfully earning at least 24 credits here at Danville High School. Students do wear matching purple caps and gowns with orange sashes that night so that we are matched in uniform as the Danville class of this year. It'll be 2025. We do, as do many high schools across our nation, do allow our Honor Society students, because the Honor Society achievement is specifically connected to academic achievement. So it's connected to those 24 credits that they've earned, does wear a simple gold cord in addition to the purple caps and purple gowns, and orange sashes. And that is the night where we do honor our valedictorian, who's first academically in the class, and salutatorian, who's second academically in the class. And they are given medals, and that's the time that they're publicly announced as the valedictorian and salutatorian of the class. Again, those are academic achievements, and the only time that those academic achievements are celebrated. So that's a part of them earning those 24 credits. Again, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gump and Mr. Varhalik if there's anything that you'd want to add about the graduation ceremony and the purpose of that evening.
No, again, it's always when we do something outside, we take a risk in doing so. But I think the way we have things planned is we do provide parents with basically times where, look, we're going to make a call by, and I forget what it was, maybe 3:30 or maybe 12 o'clock or whatever it may be. But that we make that determination. We share those dates out earlier. And again, I just have to say, my first time around at the high school, we did it outside the majority of the time. It's just absolutely beautiful to be out there for a graduation ceremony, to see the purple and orange, not only on the field, but also sometimes in the sky because of the sun setting and such. It's a beautiful event.
And Dr. Gump and Mr. Varhalik do a great job communicating with parents all throughout, especially the springtime. Gets very busy for families of seniors about all of the events that are coming. They also have active meetings with senior leadership, like the actual seniors, to talk about the events, to plan them through, to talk about student expectations at the events. So there's a lot of student voice in those things. So I did just want to share that with the board. Happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure Mr. Varhalik and Dr. Gump are as well. Right. Our next item in this section is VOTEC application totals. So I just wanted to share with the board, this is for next year's class, so of our current 8th graders. So 53 students picked up an application from the guidance office at the middle school. 48 students turned in a completed application by the deadline, and we have 38 slots available for Danville next year. They are currently in the review process at CMA VTS, and we have not yet heard about our application acceptance yet, but it is in their hands currently.
What determines how many spots?
It is like your percentage based on your population of your school and the populations of the other sending schools. So you get like a portion of basically their freshman class, if you will. So I'm certainly hopeful with 48 students that have turned in a completed application packet that we'd be able to fill those 38 slots. I also specifically would like to thank Ms. Niehoff at the guidance office at the middle school, who does an excellent job working with CMA VTS and really helping students prepare their applications. And I feel like she does a great job of helping guide students that really would be a good fit there, so that we're sending people that will ultimately be successful once they're there. Dr. Snover, I don't know if you have anything else you'd want to add about that process in the 8th grade. Yeah, and I certainly would like to shout out Mrs. Earp last spring, and I know that Miss Wenrick will be involved in that with her being at the middle school this year, really worked to support their special ed director if there were any questions when a special education student was applying about whether or not they would be the right fit there and helping them go through that application process. So we are certainly willing to do whatever we can on our end to make that process go smoothly. That takes us to finance, and I will turn it over to Mr. Mabus and also get a chance to rest my voice.
Thank you so much, Dr. Need. So, thank you, Mr. Ryan. Before you, board members, you have an updated budget working papers document. This is the same format that you were provided with last month, where you can peruse through each of our department's individual expenses. There are some changes on the expenditure side, and just talk about those briefly, where the total comes out to $48,327,482.50. That includes a $200,000 projected transfer to the capital reserve and also a $200,000 budgetary reserve figure. Some of the expenses that changed since February 5th where Mr. Ryan did get updated pricing on one of his major projects where he's going to be replacing 2 core switches for the district, and saw a substantial cost decrease where that from the manufacturer's suggested retail price to what he got through PEPM. So that project, those costs were decreased. At the same time, we ordered our Chromebooks for 25-26 a few weeks ago, and our vendor gave us a price initially, and then tried to, when we went to order, tried to up that price based on the potential for tariffs. Mr. Ryan did a good job of pushing back on that vendor and confirming that those tariffs hadn't actually taken effect yet. So we got those prices locked in for this year, but by next spring, we're anticipating some increased costs on that side. Later on in the meeting, we'll talk in more detail about the Geisinger Athletic Training Services contract. We're anticipating a cost increase there. And then I had to do some updates to our pass-through programs. And those pass-through programs, if we see, so I increased the expenses on there just because of an oversight on my part for the February 5th version. But whenever expenses increase on a pass-through program, you also see those revenues matching. So in terms of deficit, there's no impact, but that's just why that number is higher than what you saw last month. At the bottom of this slide, I do want to highlight for this year only, since we moved into a self-insured model with PSHIC just shortly after I arrived here, we locked in our premiums starting in January of 2025 all the way through June of 2026. So we get essentially a 1-year reprieve on having to budget higher health insurance premiums. And that goes, so that's for this year and this year only. In 26, 27 and 27, 28, we can expect to see the, sort of industry average of, 7, 10, even as high as 15%. If things go, under a self-insured model, we have even more incentive as a district to maintain our health as individuals and as a community. I know BSI has been working with our staff members to get staff members involved in some of the wellness programs they have, making sure they're well aware of the telehealth options. So there are things we can do as a group to keep those costs down, but fortunately for 25-26, we don't have to budget a cost increase for this budget year. But it's something that, as a district, we need to understand that it's a one-time deal. We won't get to do that in 26-27, and approximately a 10% increase on our health care is about $500,000. So that's an expense increase that we aren't seeing in 25-26 that we will see going forward. But Mr. Ryan, if you could move on to the next slide, we'll start talking revenues. On the local revenue side, or in total, our revenues are 47 million. Projected revenues are $47,608,801.63. You know, the difference between our projected revenues and our expenses would be covered by our use of fund balance in the amount of $718,000 or 680 and 87 cents. On the local revenue side, your two big ticket items are your local real estate tax and your earned income tax. The revenue figure you see at the top there does not include any local real estate tax increase at this time. I should note that in December, the board passed the Act 1 resolution capping any real estate tax increase at the Act 1 index, which for Danville is 4% this year. And so that's the local, the state determines essentially the local rate of inflation for each school district. And they set a statewide base rate, and this fiscal year, it just so happens, Danville qualifies for that statewide rate, and that statewide rate is 4%. There's a formula that determines if you see that go above that. So you might see some of our neighboring districts having higher Act 1 index rates. That's why they just qualified for that higher rate based on the Act 1 index formula. So last year, for example, Danville's Act 1 index rate was 6.1%. The statewide rate was 5.3%. So Danville is just on the cusp of qualifying for that or not. But that's the maximum tax increase that we've legally agreed to even consider. One other thing that happened last year, and we'll follow through on it because it came to pass, was Mr. Sokolowski increased the budgeted collection rate from 95.1% to 96.5% based on historical collection rates. So we actually came in pretty much right on the mark with that. So kudos to Mr. Sokolowski for that. Our local real estate collections came in within, $4,000, net of penalties and discounts, and on a budgeted line item of over $15 million. That's a really tight mark. The other item here under local real estate that I have is the potential for volatility. Typically, local real estate is a stable line item year over year, but our community should know that we do have the potential for a major contributor on the local real estate side through the Cherokee plant to have some changes there as that facility and that business undergoes changes. So that's just something for us to consider, going forward as a board and as a community. Moving on to earned income tax. In the budgeted projections, there's an increase, a linear increase of $210,000 projected for the earned income tax. And based on our historical budgeting level for earned income, I'm comfortable, if the board's understanding of this, of increasing that for this year by an additional $400,000 to similar to what we did for local real estate tax. We could do that for earned income tax this year and project that budgeted figure close to what our expected collections are. Now, in general, earned income tax is a more volatile line item than local real estate. Of course, during the first year of the pandemic, we actually saw a decrease as a district in our earned income tax collections. Now, that's a kind of an aberration, but it just needs to be noted that earned income tax is a slightly more volatile figure than your local real estate tax collections. Mr. Brookhart.
Yeah, and we're projecting this year's earned income to be about what we're budgeting for next year, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So even though we're going 400,000 more next year, and we normally would project it at 210, because of the fact that we under budgeted last year to projections, next year we're comfortable doing this.
Yes.
So it's not, it's volatile, but it's not necessarily a gamble.
No, not at all. And as long as, as long as we're understanding as a group that if those collections come in slightly under your projected figure, that means that you may not be able to do the full transfer to the capital reserve that you projected, or that your budgetary reserve might need to be reduced to cover that shortfall. So as long as everyone's understanding of that, if we weren't willing to do a budgetary reserve, I would not be willing to show the board a number, for example, that included that what I think is a realistic projection based on historical figures. I went back 10 years, and you can see that linear trend over 10 years is pretty stable. But of course, you can have a one-time miss, and so it's just important for us to understand where that is coming from. So yeah, so this year for fiscal year 25, we have a budgeted figure of 8.4 million, and for the budget for fiscal year 26, I have in there projected revenue of slightly over 9 million, so 9,010,000.
And our projection this year would be about 8.8, the way it's
Yes,
going.
yeah, where we're going right now.
We budgeted
probably
8.4, but we think we're going to get 8.8.
correct.
So next year's projection will be 200,000 more.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's the story of revenues for the local side. Mr. Ryan, if you could move forward to the next slide, we can have a look at state and federal. On the state revenue side, Danville, there's now two formulas that the state is using to drive education dollars out to districts. There's what I'll call the old formula. By that formula, we're projected to receive a $43,000 increase, and that's only a 0.5% year-over-year increase. Under the new formula, which you may hear that referred to as the adequacy fund, we get $0 from that fund. The governor's budget proposal is to drive about $560 million through the new formula and $75 million through the old formula. Next year will be the second year of having that discrepancy, or those two different formulas going. And I just wanted to share with the board and with the community the impact of that new funding paradigm. So what you see there for fiscal year 25 and 26 are what Danville would have received if all of the additional new funds had been driven through the old formula. So in fiscal year 25, Danville would have received $734,000. Instead, we received $192,000, so a difference of $542,000. And in fiscal year 26, this difference we would receive, if all of those new funds the governor was proposing went through the old formula, we'd receive $366,000. With the split between the old formula and new formula, we'll receive approximately $323,000 less. So the 2-year net ongoing impact is about $865,000. And keep in mind, you may have heard me say this, next year is year 2 of 7 skinny cows. This plan to drive funds through the new formula is a 7-year plan in response to the constitutionality lawsuit that was ongoing for approximately a decade. I think, Mr. Brookhart, that started in 2013 and was resolved
It was
in
9 years from the time it was filed to the time they settled it, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we're in year 1 of the legislature's response to that. Obviously, $865,000 is a significant line item for any district. To put it in context of some of the projects that we've talked about, that's about a third of the surplus that we need to build if we want to take on the debt service to do one of those major projects. So that's kind of how it's impacting us. There are some other districts that it's going to impact them more severely in terms of their ongoing programs. And so I know they're saying this will go on for 7 years, but there are some districts that might not be able to last that 7 years. And so I know there's already been articles written about some local districts, and so it's certainly something that our leaders in Harrisburg will have to contend with and understand how that's impacting things. So, so yeah, so on the state side, that the potential for volatility there is just, you know, we're in kind of a new funding paradigm, and that has real impacts on our budget and our fiscal position. And then the last item, our federal revenues. I'm projecting at this time everything just level funded from this year to next year. Of course, you know, there's the potential for volatility there as well. That's a figure that we have you know, no control over. But at this point, it's not something that, you know, we have, you know, alarms going off on. So, but it's just something for us to understand that, you know, those funds are important for our programs, and you know, we need to advocate, you know, for those programs. So that's the budget in a nutshell. Mr. Ryan, you can move on to the next slide unless there are any questions from the board. You know, you can certainly ask them now, or at any point if you want to have a deeper, in-depth discussion with me about things. I'd be happy to make time for you as well.
I think we know that we're in the early stages of reduced state allocations to the district, and regardless of what happens in Harrisburg, we're not going to see the kind of money we got previously for quite a few years. At least that's how it looks. And
Yes.
we all know the federal revenue is volatile right now. I believe we just don't know where that's going. And fortunately, that's a small percentage of our funding, but
Correct.
it's still volatile, and there's still kids that depend on some of that funding.
Yeah, to put that in context, on the federal side, our largest federal revenue line item is our Head Start program, but of course that, like I said, that's a pass-through program, so any revenues are matched by expenses, you know, and that's a separate entity essentially from the district. The programs that are for our K through 6 students are title programs primarily, and you know, with the primary one being Title I, where we're budgeted to receive about $460,000 for that. So, which impacts certainly, you know, our students in the primary school get good use out of those funds. So, unless there are any other questions, and like I said, feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions or want a more in-depth discussion. I'd be happy to share with you. Some other things under finance that we'll have on the meeting for next month. There's a proposal from Industrial Appraisals to do an updated appraisal. This is something expected by our auditors. One hasn't been performed on site for a little over a decade, and even if we approve this contract next week, and Industrial Appraisals is the organization that we've historically worked with. Even if we approve it, they have a backlog of work approximately 1 year out. So this would be something that we could approve now and get on their calendar probably for a spring 2026 appraisal process. But it would be good as we close out the 23-24 audit, hopefully in the next couple months, if they want to have a discussion about when our next asset appraisal is, if I can say it's approved and it's scheduled for as soon as we can get on their calendar. Mr. Ryan, next slide. Another thing that'll be on the agenda for next week is the proposed transfer of funds out of an expenditure account to a budgetary reserve account. And we discussed this a little bit last month. There was just a typo when the budget figures were entered last year, and what should have been a $13,000 expense line item turned into a $130,000 expense line item, and you know, shared with Mr. Gump that we would be removing that out of the high school budget. Sorry, Mr. Gump. But so I would suggest we do that. And once funds are allocated, and this is just a budgetary transfer. This isn't a transfer of any actual dollars. This is just saying, if we got to the end of the fiscal year and we needed to, if one account code had been overspent, that transfer would just happen from the budgetary transfer account to budgetary reserve account to that expense account. And the board has authority to approve all budgetary transfers. And typically, what most districts do is give a singular approval to the business manager at the end of the fiscal year to approve all necessary transfers to close out the fiscal year. And that's what you did with Mr. Sokolowski last spring as well. So next slide. When I came on board, it was in the middle of the current tax year, and Mr. Sokolowski's name was on all of the tax deputization resolutions. We have one more year under the current deputization agreements, and so it would be time for us to update those resolutions and put my name on them. This does not preclude us updating those resolutions, does not preclude the possibility of local tax collectors resuming collections next year for the 3 impacted municipalities. And so it is possible that some of those collectors may choose to do so based on the agreement that we came to with them back in January. And so it's just a matter of making sure our paperwork's in order. It should have my name on them. And then if those collectors do decide they want to resume collections, we can handle that at that time.
I'm optimistic with the agreement we made with them that I think
so.
most, I think we may end up collecting 1, if any.
Yep.
I think the majority of them were very satisfied with the deal that we came together with them. So.
Yep. And that's my impression as well. Next slide. On that note, we are still collecting 3 municipalities. Those collections are completed for the year. So the board has annually approved a stipend for Mrs. Norman for that additional work. Last year, that amount was $1,500. So, yeah. And then, next slide. Another item for consideration is the, and I believe there's a letter in your folders here. Mrs. Faust, is that correct? Yes. Yep, there's a letter of engagement from SiteLogic from Darcy Brenner-Smith, who's a retired business manager who's a consultant for SiteLogic. And she has extensive experience with the PlanCon process. A little background, the high school project that was initiated in 2017 was initiated under the PlanCon program. In that program, the district's eligible for reimbursements on expenses related to that project. And when you enter into that, you provide the state a projected percentage that they'll reimburse you. And then at the conclusion of the project, you are to finalize all of your expenses, things that were that you did that were eligible for PlanCon reimbursement, because not everything is. So like turf fields are not eligible for PlanCon reimbursement, but classroom spaces are. And so you submit a final report, and then the state makes an adjustment to your reimbursement rate, reflecting that final adjustment. So so that final PlanCon Part J documentation has not been submitted to the state yet, so it is something that we have to complete. Mrs. Brenner-Smith has been incredibly helpful to me already with her expertise. She's just been sharing, some of the initial needs for that process. PlanCon is admittedly it's a program that's no longer in active service. So it was something that when I came on board here, I did not think I would have to delve into it, but she's helping me along the way. She's been fantastic so far, and I'm really appreciative of a colleague of mine, Audrey Bear from Piper Sandler, was the one who put me in touch with her, and it's been excellent. So, but we're now to the point where it's going to be more than just, hey, getting on a phone call, giving me some advice about what documentation I need to track down. We're into the meat of it. She thinks that she can complete this work in 20 hours or less. So I've proposed with the engagement letter that just to be sure we don't have to come back to you, because it's going to take several months. She projects we won't be complete till potentially August by the time the state finalizes everything and gets back to us. But to just make sure we don't have to come back to this item again, I've asked her to provide us a letter with a rate or a use not exceeding 40 hours of her time. And like I said, I think she thinks it'll be 20 hours or less. So we'd be looking at a cost of under $2,800 or so if she holds to that, which is a very fair amount. She can't guarantee that we'll see a higher reimbursement rate when this is all completed, but it's something that regardless of whether that rate goes up or down, this is a part of the process that we have to finalize.
I actually do consulting work for SiteLogic, so I'll be abstaining on that
Okay.
vote. And I know her. She's
Yeah.
good.
And I have also been in touch with Clasic about the need for them to eventually sign off on their portion of it. And in addition, I've been in touch with Crabtree. And though the architect that worked on our project is no longer with Crabtree, they do have
I'm sorry, how long ago was that?
7 years ago, 8 years ago. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. They do have, I've already been in touch with the individual that was assigned that former employee's project. So, and he's provided some information to Mrs. Brenner Smith and I.
I asked because SiteLogic actually worked here before.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. So, unless there are any questions, Ms. Ryan, you could go to the next slide. Also on next week's meeting, there is a request from the Montour County Tax Claim Bureau for a tax exoneration for the parcel listed there for $512.33 in delinquent taxes. This exoneration would allow the county to move forward with a judicial sale, and upon completion of that sale, we'd see that parcel return to, the tax rolls as a paying parcel. So, any questions on that process? That happens occasionally with school districts. Good on Montour County for being on top of this parcel. I've seen it take sometimes, 7-8 years until all of the pieces can be put in place to follow through on that process. Next slide, Mr. Ryan. So we already hit on this a little bit in the expenditures discussion. Mr. Ryan has a major project scheduled for 25-26 for the replacement of core switches for the district's network. And the MSRP on that equipment was close to $160,000. But after E-rate and PEPM pricing, we'd be closer to $73,000. So that figure has been updated on the expenditure side. Mr. Ryan, I don't know if you wanted to share anything on that.
It's just like a normal process. Anytime we do a project like this, you start out with the MSRP, see how the bid process goes and how it comes back through, and then adjust afterwards. So it's a normal process.
So unless there are any questions, next slide. Also connected to some of the projects from 2017 and 2018, we were notified that notice of termination permits had not been filed for those projects, and so we have an agreement for consulting services with ELA Group to close those projects out. And once again, this is something that we have to do, and so the
Auditorium and stadium?
yeah, and tennis courts actually. Next slide. And just wanted to provide the board an update that I have a draft of bylaws nearly complete. Dr. Need and I will have another look at those and hope to have some of those documents to you and also to our solicitor for review in the very near future. So those bylaws are kind of the first step in the process, and then there are some decisions that that we need to make about how the group is initiated, how directors are potentially selected, and so that'll be some of the things we'll be bringing forward to you in the very near future. And I think that in light of some of the changes we've seen at the state level, it only highlights just how critical the success of that foundation is for some very needed projects for the district. So with that, next slide. I think that brings us back to you, Dr. Need.
On the next slide, you'll see an updated version. I had shared this with members of long-range planning, had asked to just see what a field drawing could look like. At this point, we would need to have further meetings to look at exact price points, but this has essentially a similar structure to what previous drawings had in terms of the types of things on the property, like 2 turf fields, practice fields, baseball, softball, small field house. But the change you see here is entry off of the service road that the borough owns as opposed to entry off of State Hospital Drive. So you see the parking down off of that service road. So it's resituated the things in that drawing to allow for that as an option if as the board's considering field projects, wanted to move with that as an entry point. I don't know if anyone on long-range planning wanted to speak about the thinking behind using that road.
So the reason that we decided to use that road was obviously we had that discussion with the state and their concerns with the increased traffic on State Hospital Drive. One of the things they brought up in that meeting was the fact that we had, 3 entrances to the primary school?
Correct.
And there was only supposed to be 1, I think.
That's what they claim. I don't have any records that indicate that, but
So to kind of rectify that whole problem and concern that they had, we've established a good relationship with the borough that I don't know the district's always had. But we've worked through that, and our relationship with the borough's gotten to be a very good one. They have this access road that's actually on a part of State Hospital Drive that they control and they own, which is, the State Hospital Drive layout's very, very weird, how it's laid out, because they own like the middle section of the road, which is very confusing to
it's
me.
kind of bizarre.
Yeah, but anyway. So that access road is in their section, and they are more than willing to let us use that access road to get onto our property, which solves a lot of problems for us as far as getting onto our property. So that's the route that I think that we would like to go. Path of least resistance is always the best one. Mr. Haravi's looking at me smiling, so I think he's in agreement. And kind of the way the layout is now, I think if we make the majority of the project grass with the baseball and softball fields, that should cut down significantly on the cost. We obviously want to keep turf fields there because, and Mr. Alverson can attest to this, A lot of our outdoor sports now are played on turf fields. Therefore, we'd like to have our students be able to practice on turf fields, because I can tell you from playing sports myself, and I know there's some people in here in the audience that have played sports too going through high school, there is a tremendous difference between reaction of balls on turf versus natural grass. So we obviously would not want to put our students at a disadvantage of practicing on a grass field and then going to an event on a turf field.
So I just wanted to share that drawing with everyone as we think about those projects moving forward. We'll move forward with buildings and grounds, and I'll actually turn it back to Mr. Mavis. We did have tennis court bids come in today, and he has an update on those.
Yep. So, Mr. Ryan, if you could move to the next slide. So, bids were due today on the proposed projects for the tennis court. There were in the RFP, the request for proposal, there were two different options that contractors could bid on. The first option was milling the surface of the tennis court structure and taking off the entirety of the wearing course, so milling it down approximately 3 inches, and then paving that surface back up 3 inches. And so we received, that should actually switch those two for the bids received. It should say 4 at the top for project 1 and 3 at the bottom for project 2, but anyway, excuse that typo. The 4 bids we received for the milling and resurfacing are listed there. At this point, the references have not been checked for those contractors. The milling and resurfacing project is obviously the more challenging of the two options. It requires the removal of the fencing and all interior and exterior to be done properly. You can't get a milling machine within a very within an inch or two of the exterior fence fabric, where you could just mill out the interior and fill that in. So it is a more complicated project, and also just more material would be required to pave that back up. And so that it is understandable, with it being a more challenging project, that we'd see higher prices there. We do have Keystone Sports with a proposal that is fairly close to their resurfacing project. So in the bid analysis stage, I need to confirm that they're actually following the specs for that bid. The fact that there's difference between the resurfacing, which the resurfacing just involves tacking the existing surface, applying Petromat, tacking that, and then paving 1.5 inches on top of that. For them to only have a difference of $7,000 is quite surprising, because just in asphalt alone, you'd have double the amount of material. That Keystone proposal for Project 1, when I review that, I'm skeptical that it will hold up to scrutiny. But that's something that we can get into. What I need from the board is a little bit of direction about which of the two projects we'd like to see entertained. In discussing the two options with not only the contractors that registered, but also some outside entities, the longevity of these two projects in terms of our tennis courts are both in the 10 to 15 year range. So I would have expected that milling out the surface and completely repaving it would have given us a slightly longer lead time, but in speaking with groups that do this sort of work, they said you can expect about, regardless of whether you do just the resurfacing or the milling and resurfacing, you're probably going to see a 10 to 15 year timeline on a well done project. The two issues that we had with the existing tennis court structure is that the asphalt mix used recycled materials in it, and the acrylic paint system was applied shortly after the asphalt was actually paved. And so we've been very clear as part of the RFP and in all of our communications with the contractors that bid that we need a virgin asphalt mix with no recycled materials, and we will be following strictly the manufacturer's suggested timeline for how long the asphalt, the paving needs to sit prior to painting occurring. So it would be like if you were, you know, if you had a piece of, you know, waterlogged wood and you painted on top of it. Of course, the paint is not going to adhere properly. The same thing happened with the tennis court. The last time when it was initially done, reportedly the paint was applied literally the day after it was paved. And so, you know, that oil that's in the asphalt hasn't soaked into the aggregate. And so you're essentially painting on top of that. Now, so that's why when you see those that spider webbing on the tennis courts, that's probably the source of it, and the recycled materials. One thing that we also have, we have some cracks along the white lines of the tennis courts. That is likely due to the dark areas of the courts absorbing more heat than the white lines, and so you're just going to see relative expansion and contraction in that white line area. And so even with fixing the courts and using virgin asphalt and waiting the appropriate amount of time to apply the acrylic system to it, we'll still probably eventually see those cracks in the white lines. And Mr. George has already looked into what you need to do to resolve that when they do eventually occur. So, you know, so that's in our tennis program. You know, you could use slightly different colors, but our courts are the same colors as the U.S. Open uses, and so that's what they've requested. And mhm. Mhm. So these are fixed price bids from these companies. Even if asphalt pricing increases through the spring, which historically it does, these prices are locked in. You know, we're not tied to any asphalt index.
We got them today.
We got them today at 3 o'clock.
You're gonna check with Keystone to find out why their
Correct.
difference is so tight?
Yes.
Because one of them's like $185,000.
Yes.
So there's something that we need to work on.
Right. Yeah, so even if the board wanted to do project one, milling and resurfacing, I'm very skeptical of Keystone's bid for that it was properly spec'd by them, and
They have a certain amount of time to withdraw their bid, don't they?
yeah, or
Like within 72 hours.
yeah,
That's true or not. But we have to verify the bid. We
Right.
have to verify the bid.
right. We have to verify it, and so it's in terms of you know, the two options that I didn't really describe project two, just resurfacing in detail, but the goal with that would be to have like I said, the existing surface tacked, covered in Petromat, tacked again, and then just paved 1.5 inches higher. And so there would be a section close to the external fence fabric where you'd have a gap of about 1.5 inches. And so as part of the specifications, they're to get that paving within 1 inch of that fabric, so that way you don't have tennis balls like getting stuck in that gap between the fence fabric and the surface. So correct.
Is there a difference in any type of a guarantee from any of the companies if we do one versus the other? So is there like a change in how long they'll warranty their work,
Part of the RFP was a three-year warranty,
regardless of
regardless of
direction we
which
go?
project.
Okay.
Correct. And if there are going to be issues, they're gonna likely start to arise in the first 3 years.
And none of these include the painting.
No, these do include the
This is
painting.
the full-
Yep. Yeah, this is the full
This is the
package.
full-
And
Court
all of
ready.
them are in-house?
No, in all cases, they would be subcontracting the painting work. But like I said, we've made it very clear that they would be strictly adhering to the manufacturer's timelines for the recommended time from finished paving till when you start painting. They're well aware of our timeline that we need this project to happen on. We want this completed by July 28th, because that would be approximately 2 weeks before the fall season. So, I know as a former coach of a fall sport, I wanted to be able to do open practices at least 2 weeks before the season started. And so, of course, we could have our team practicing down at the middle school during that time period, but they have to get this started by no later than June 16th, so that way they have the appropriate timelines to get that done. And also, with tennis courts, with everything needing to be level, it will be weather dependent. You don't want to pave a surface that you need to be 100% level on a day where it's 45 and cloudy. So they're probably going to have some nice hot days to make sure that the asphalt levels off. I think in terms of the two projects, the resurfacing project 2 seems to me to be the one that I envision going the most smoothly, just because it doesn't involve tearing out the existing fence, and it's only the interior fence that they have to take the fabric down. If I was being told that the milling and resurfacing had a projected lifespan of double what we get for resurfacing, then I think we could, then I'd say, okay, well, that's like a toss up. What do we think? But that's just my.
I think
thought, but-
resurfacing would probably be the better option, because wasn't the main concern what was underneath anyway?
Yeah.
So if we're just going to go on top of what's there, that kind of gives us more of a solid surface to start with versus what
Yeah.
we started with before.
And we did have the report from Mid-Atlantic showing that, despite their somewhat confusing terminology, where they said they said the wearing course was visibly poorly compacted, and when I pushed them on what that meant, they said, well, that's relative to if you're for a highway where you have 18 wheelers, for a high school tennis court, that's not the source of the issue. And also, what was it? Poorly graded gravel was used, which is just an industry term, so not a reflection of the quality. So, Mid-Atlantic said essentially structurally stable for a tennis court. So what is encouraging to me about Project 2 is how tight those bids are. That to me shows that the way that specification was written, that the contractors and the district are fairly well aligned. So that's always a good sign when you get a pretty tight pattern there.
Yeah.
So.
Back in the fall when we had the meeting, Keystone was the gentleman that did most of the talking, correct? Is he the one that set off to the left, I believe?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
The only reason why I'm asking is because I thought he said with the resurfacing project, they were going to only offer a 1-year warranty. That's why I just want to make sure on the resale, because Bauer didn't put in for the bid then,
Correct.
and Rightway never showed up. There was another one that showed up as well, and I don't remember exactly who they were. But I'm pretty sure
recall.
the gentleman from Keystone, because that's when the whole core sampling came, talk come about, and he seemed to be pretty knowledgeable, because he had mentioned about the epoxy, that it was a good quality epoxy, but it's more for southern climate versus here. But he did state that, he thought it was more of the material from the asphalt. I just want to double check that, that it is a
Warranty on
3-year, because I thought he had said a 1-year in the meeting we had in the fall.
And that's something I'll get into when I'm doing the review process. But in the RFP, it is very clear that we're requesting a 3-year warranty on this with a warranty bond. So.
And milling and resurfacing is superior to resurfacing. Even though you don't get longer out of it, there must be something that is going to make it better because everybody's charging more and there's more to it. I'm assuming you guys might know more than I do about it.
Yeah, I'd say in the milling process, I don't know, there's more behind it because they know what they're doing, you know what I mean? Instead of putting like a Band-Aid over something that is already there.
All right.
I mean, that would be
Well,
they're more trusting in their own work. It's all theirs. It's not, you know what I mean?
yeah. The reason I'm asking is because we probably first should make sure that Keystone's price for milling and resurfacing isn't the real price, and they don't have some agenda for
Yeah.
giving us such a low price. Maybe it's to get future work with us. I don't know, but
Yeah.
if we have some confidence in them, because they were here, I believe.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with any of them with tennis courts. I know Bowers, they're from Berwick.
I think I know what you're gonna say. Like, we'd be foolish if that's their actual price not to take them.
Might as well take it, yeah.
Might as well for
Yeah.
7
Yeah.
And if they say no, then we can say, okay, we're going to pivot back to resurfacing because the price is so different and we're not getting any longevity out of it. But I wouldn't just kind of turn my back to that price that they have until they tell us that we should do that if we have some confidence in them. That's my feeling anyway.
I think that's a good point.
Did Bauer give you a reasoning for not bidding on the resurfacing?
No, we did have
I'll fill you in later.
we did have someone attend from Rightway for the bid opening process, but
Yeah.
Bauer wasn't represented there. So
Yeah, and obviously price is the main factor, but I guess the other factor, that I would look at is their experience with doing these kind of things.
You mean,
Obviously, they're all companies that work with asphalt, but Bauer paves interstates. How many tennis courts have you know what I mean? Like, that's, I don't know, in
And
my
on-
eyes, that's a big,
that-
on the bid,
I'm sorry, that was actually part of why I brought up what I did about Keystone, because I think they're an athletic company.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know Rightway does driveways. I don't know if they've done a lot of tennis courts. I'm real familiar with Bauer.
yeah.
And I don't know that they do a lot of athletic facilities of like that
Yeah.
type either.
Yeah, and I don't know, generally speaking, asphalt's asphalt, but, you're not
Yeah.
just laying the asphalt and leaving. We're putting something else over the asphalt, and, who's your subcontractor that, how many times have they done tennis courts with the epoxy? You know what I mean? There's a lot of in-between factors that are very
Yeah.
determining.
So I'll investigate those bids and see what we have and
We want something on the agenda soon, I'm assuming.
so we definitely need to take action by our April meeting for them
Okay.
to be able to have the appropriate amount of time to get us scheduled, because we would like them to schedule or to start no later than June 16th.
Right, sure.
And so ideally, they'd even be able to start as soon as our spring.
Boys' season
Yes,
is over.
as soon as the boys' tennis season is over,
Okay,
to just make sure that we have appropriate
yeah.
time to get that
do we-
fixed.
How do you want to?
Do we want Lance to check on the Keystone?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
if we want an agenda item next week, we could do that if we give them the proper contingencies and Dr. Need as well, if that's the path we're going. And if you want to wait till April, it sounds we can do that too.
I mean,
Okay.
I kind of agree with the point you brought up. I mean, their offer that they made to do the job for everything is within the realm of, they're within $5,000 of the most expensive bid to just resurface.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
again, why wouldn't you take them up on that if
And
they're
they-
willing to do both?
And I don't know anybody from the company, but they may know that we have other work coming. And they're just
That's
trying to
true.
develop a relationship and some confidence. That happens a lot in this business.
You
I'm
know,
not
if that's the
sure
case,
that's the
let's-
case, but it
let's
could
not
be.
take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
think
That's
I'm
not
fine
an
with
answer.
that.
Yep.
I think that makes the
Well,
most sense.
and
Does
I
make
like the
sense.
fact that he showed up, not everybody
At
that
that night.
proposed, he showed up that night, he was pretty thorough with everything, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. I think most important, I mean, we don't want to spend a lot of money, you never do, but most importantly, we don't want to revisit this in a year or 2 or 3.
Oh, we
We want it done right.
Correct. I want to deal with
Never
the tennis
talk about
courts
it.
like once
Yeah.
in my career here. So,
Well,
yeah.
see.
Well, isn't the purpose of milling for adhesion purposes? So when they put the new surface over, it adheres better to what's existing. I don't know how far they go, as far down they go when they mill it. But I think that may be an essential thing to do, and rather to just put macadam over the top of macadam.
Mhm.
And the fact that they're, at that particular price for Keystone, would they also be willing to have virgin macadam and do all the things that you want to do for that
Yeah,
price?
I mean that's
required.
that's part of
required in the bid.
that's required in the bid that it's a virgin asphalt mix, that they adhere to those timelines, that it's a 3-year warranty. I mean that's all part of the bid evaluation process is ensuring that we're on the same page there. But
So what is the feeling about the necessity of milling? Is it really necessary to have good adhesion? Why do they do it?
So typically they just you have surface level cracks and you need to get rid of those before you apply new. In our case, the cracks aren't so substantial. It's not like our courts right now are not like our high school courts are not like our middle school courts. The middle school courts are in in need of more significant work.
There's
But
an understatement.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So with the condition of our courts right now, the resurfacing process, that's what the petromat is for. That's what the tacking would be for, to make sure you have good adhesion between the existing surface and not. Of course, the milling process would typically you only need to mill down like 1.5 inches, but that's our wearing course for the tennis courts is closer to 3 inches. So that's why the proposed amount was 3 inches to get that removed and the existing wearing course completely removed and then repaved. So I'll do some evaluation on these bids. If we have good response back, we might see it on the agenda for next week. If not, we definitely need to be ready to take action by April.
That takes us to athletics and extracurriculars, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Gump for 8.1 club stipend adjustments.
Sure. I have three considerations for the board for next week. The first is the DHS Fire Club. It was chartered in December of 23. Mr. Eric Franz at that time was approved as a volunteer advisor. Since that time, Mr. Franz and Mr. Devin Frank have served on a voluntary basis. So as this club has grown in numbers and also the activities that it's doing, Mr. Frank has taken on more responsibilities. So I'm asking the board to consider approving Mr. Frank for a stipend for this role as a faculty advisor for the cost of $449.50. Mr. Franz will continue as a community volunteer advisor. The second slide goes over our student council advisors. In the past, these advisors would be maybe considered class advisors. My experience, again, my first time around at Danville High School, typically you'd have 1 or 2 class advisors, but at the start of 23-24, they took all the class advisors and they really put them all together in creating consistency from 9th grade all the way through 12th grade. So again, at the start of the 23-24, there were 7 advisors, but through attrition and some staffing changes at the high school, we now are down to 4. I've advertised 2 times this year, at the start of the year and middle of the year, to see if more advisors would be interested in joining, and at this time we have no one who's willing to jump on in that role. So again, I'm asking the board to consider, with the additional workload spread among the 4 advisors, to take the balance of the vacant 3 positions and increase the current stipend of $1,142 to $1,998.50 for the 4 current active advisors. Again, this wouldn't be a budget increase. It would just be taking the money from the 3 vacant positions and spreading it out among the 4. Again, there's a lot of work through fundraising, meeting with students, putting on events, helping with events such as graduation that our class advisors have. Again, that's, to me, that's a big ask. Does the board have any questions at this time? Okay, and final one is this summer weight room supervisor. This position was filled last year, but then it was the weight room supervisor resigned. So we had that advisor had the winter and summer time frame. So we have filled that with the winter one with Mr. McConnell, our new PE teacher, and it's just time to then place someone in for the summer weight room. So I advertised for that. Mr. Frank was the only teacher that stepped forward for it, and we would like to recommend Mr. Devin Frank for that position at a cost of $2,163. Again, summer weight room.
When would that be? That would
Mr.
be-
Albertson, did we start that right after the school closes?
Essentially the
Yeah.
entire summer.
Yes.
They have like set hours in the weight room. And it has been an annual position, just changing who we initially approved to Devin.
Thank you.
I seem to be getting worse as the evening goes on. I apologize. Boys lacrosse coaching numbers. If you click on that link, Mr. Ryan, you'll just see our overall coaching numbers, which I have shared with the board and brought to your attention last month. The boys lacrosse team has asked that you look at considering adding a paid assistant coach to boys lacrosse based on the ratios that you see in other sports, specifically other sports that are considered contact sports. There you specifically see where boys lacrosse currently sits with a paid head coach and a paid assistant coach and 3 volunteer coaches. Their average, if you recall from when we looked at this last month, is we take the number of paid coaches only, divide by the number of players that either participated last year or signed up this year, and we get an average like coach to player ratio. Certainly that player to coach ratio still sits in a ratio that we'd feel comfortable with in a classroom, but I would name that it sits higher than the ratio for some of our other sports. So I let the boys lacrosse team know that I'd bring their request to the board, and I had emailed you all about this request as well. So I don't know if the board is interested in taking action on adding a paid assistant coach or is preferring that those numbers stay the same.
Yeah, I think we've done it with what we've recently done in other sports. I think we should. I think it fits.
I would agree, based on the numbers that I just saw. It looks like the ratio is significantly different from boys to girls. And anytime you have that, regardless of which direction it's going, you probably should try to adjust to where they're relatively even, at least from what I saw. Is that correct? It's one coach for every 8.5 girls and one for
Yes,
every 19.5 boys?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it warrants an additional position.
Yeah, if you look specifically just within the sport of lacrosse, you'll see that the ratio for girls is 8.75 with additional paid coaches. If the board would feel comfortable, similar to what we did with soccer, and we'll talk about personnel positions, the lacrosse season has started, so it is something that we could post relatively quickly. And if the board feel comfortable, we could move forward with offering that and then bring that to the board. We wouldn't be able to probably pull that off by next week, just in fairness for people to be able to apply. but we could let them start between now and April, but bring their name to the board in April.
I know we approve a lot of these relatively quickly, but and I was a coach for a long time, and I know a lot of us have a history with athletics, but you get into safety and supervision, to me, it's a small price to pay.
Sure.
To make sure that you have proper supervision when you have a high participant, high speed impact sport, and the kids are learning to do what they're supposed to do the right way. I think it's money well spent. That's just my opinion.
Certainly, if you watch a boys lacrosse game, it's definitely a
fast game.
contact sport.
Yeah.
And again, those words, contact and collision sports, were identified by our insurance company too. We had talked about that last week. I will speak with Mr. Frank, who's our head coach, and we'll get that process moving. Item 8.3 is our Geisinger athletic trainer agreement. I'm actually going to turn that over to Mr. Mabus because I know that he also knows about this, and then I can stop talking.
Thank you, Dr. Need. So Geisinger, our contract with Geisinger for our athletic training services is up this year. They're proposing an updated contract, 3-year term. I believe you were all sent a proposal document with the board agenda, but inside your folders there is the contract agreement with the detailed language. They're proposing 2 athletic trainers under this contract, with the contract being programmed at a higher number of hours than what we previously had programmed into the contract. Previously, it was approximately 2,000 hours for across the school year for 2 trainers. This would be a contract for 2,800 hours for 2 trainers, so 1,400 hours a trainer. It has been an issue that their staffing has not always afforded us 2 trainers in recent times, but I've spoken with their management team, and they do have a plan for next school year to have us fully staffed with 2 trainers. And that language is updated in the contract under the compensation and payment terms section, where I asked them to add a line into the contract specifying that if they are unable to staff 2 trainers, that we would only pay half the amount of the contract, and if we needed an additional trainer for a particular night, let's say there are multiple events going on, that we wouldn't be charged the hourly rate of that second trainer. We'd only be charged the contracted hourly rate. So they have put that in there for us. The cost of the contract for next school year would be $112,694.40, and they'd be looking for 3% increases year over year from there. That is higher than we're currently paying, but there are 2 things to note. One, we would be contractually privileged to additional hours that we aren't currently. And then 2, the old agreement included a $10,500 marketing discount, and Geisinger is trying to separate out that marketing agreement from the actual athletic services agreement. So that price that you see in this current agreement does not include a marketing agreement. They have put me in touch with their marketing team, so we could potentially see that separate agreement coming forward at a future meeting. Certainly it is a higher cost, but that higher cost, I did update our budget figures as I described earlier, so that higher cost is already reflected in the expenditures that you see in your budget working papers. Any questions from the board on that? If not, next slide, Mr. Ryan.
And I'll turn this over to Dr. Gump.
Okay, an update for, our Athletics Hall of Fame. The committee held the last meeting on February 11th, so just wanted to review some timelines and big milestones coming up. So we are accepting nominations through the end of this month. So this really is the last call for nominations. We're up to 47. So I think it was 44 the last meeting that I shared with you. So we've only gotten a few more, so that is slowing down. But we are wrapping up nominations this month. The selection committee, the entire committee, will have to meet repeatedly through the month of April to go ahead and select the inaugural class of 2025 inductees. The plan is to then contact the inductees and or their family members, contact them privately in late April, early May to be sure they're going to accept the nomination moving forward. And then the names of the inaugural class will be announced publicly in May. Our plan is to have the festivities over September 19th and 20th, so that's a home football game, and then the ceremony the following day. The committee is also discussing many other topics, including the location of the ceremony, sponsorship ideas, plaque designs, the Hall of Fame location and design. So as we discussed last time, there's a lot that needs to be done in a relatively short amount of time. So but we are focusing on nominations and selection first, and then we have a lot of other decisions to make as a committee there. Our next meeting is scheduled for this month, March 18th, but then again from there, I think we may be meeting more frequently than just the once per month. But that's an overall gist of our last meeting. School board members, do you have any questions, concerns at this time with the committee? Thank you.
As we move to policy, you'll just be getting the second reading of Policy 8, which is the updated organizational chart that was shared last month that reflects the change from assistant superintendent to director of curriculum. So that will be up for second read. And in personnel, some personnel items that you'll have to vote on for the month of March. I apologize, it says February at the top, it should say March. Custodial interviews were held this past week with an interview team of Tim and Karen and Heaven. We have both first shift and one first shift and 2 second shift openings right now. So those are our applicants and interviews held. We have a 205-day secretary position at Liberty Valley. There were 5 applicants and 5 interviews with that listed interview team. So there'll be a recommended candidate for next week. Both the junior high girls soccer assistant coach and the junior high boys soccer assistant coach, which we discussed last month, those interviews were held and those applicants will be recommended next week. And the director of curriculum, instruction, and technology position, and I apologize, you can't necessarily see all of that information there, but to take you through that process, there were 7 applicants. There were 5 first round interviews with an interview team of Molly Need, Lance Mabus, Jeff Ryan, Alyssa Wenrick, and Dave Snover. There were then 3 applicants invited back for a second round interview, and the entire administrative team served as the interview team in the second round process for that position. So those will be the personnel positions that you'll see on next week's agenda. And then the last item to share is just that last month we did the second read and the approval of the calendar for the 25-26 school year. So then following that is just an approval of a holiday calendar for our year-round employees. It is dictated the number of days that people get for their holidays in our contracts, so like in our support staff contract. And so then we just designate the specific days. So for example, Thanksgiving serves as a paid holiday. We just go ahead and put the specific date in which that falls in 25-26 on this approved calendar. So this annually follows our district approved calendar. So you'll see that on Wednesday as well. That is the last item. That takes us through 10.2, Mr. President.
That will take us to number 11, board concerns and items for next meeting agenda. Guess we'll want to put on there about the cell phone.
Yes, I made a note to move that to April. Yes, thank you.
Anybody else have anything they want on the agenda for next meeting? Left and right, so that means no. Okay, so our next item would be number 12, public comment. Maximum of 3 minutes. Nothing at this time. So that moves us to number 13, everybody's favorite time of the night, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
And we do have, followed by executive session.
And we will be moving to an executive session. But do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
And we're out of here. Have a good night, everybody.
That was outside.